The morning I found Luna trapped in that dumpster, covered in garbage and trembling with terror, I knew Patricia Williams had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. My blind 12-year-old son Marcus was still sleeping upstairs, unaware that his best friend and guide had spent the night locked in darkness, fighting for air through rotting trash. I knelt beside that metal container, my hands shaking as I lifted out the golden retriever who trusted humans to protect her. Luna's eyes met mine, and I saw something I had never seen before in those gentle brown depths. Fear. Pure, devastating fear of the very people she was trained to help. As I carried her toward our house, Patricia appeared on her front porch with her morning coffee, watching me with a smile that made my blood turn to ice. She knew exactly what she had done. She knew exactly what she had taken from my son. That was the moment Patricia Williams signed her own destruction warrant. She just did not know it yet. My name is David Chen, and 18 months ago, I thought I had found the perfect place to raise my son. Our little house on Maple Street sat in the middle of Willowbrook Estates, a quiet HOA community where children rode bicycles on sidewalks and neighbors waved from their perfectly manicured front yards. Marcus had been blind since birth, but at 12 years old, he navigated our world with the kind of courage that humbled me every single day. When his orientation and mobility specialist suggested we get him a service dog in training, I knew it was exactly what he needed. Luna came to us as a 10-month-old golden retriever, already showing the intelligence and gentle nature that would make her perfect for Marcus. I watched my son transform the moment Luna entered our lives. Where he once hesitated at doorways and clung to walls, he began walking with confidence. Luna became his eyes, his companion and his best friend, all wrapped into one golden package of unconditional love. As a former military intelligence officer turned cybersecurity consultant, I worked from home, which meant I could watch Marcus and Luna grow together. Every morning they would walk the neighborhood paths. Every afternoon they practiced commands in our backyard. Every evening Luna would curl up beside Marcus's bed, one protective paw draped across his feet. For 6 months, life felt perfect. The HOA seemed reasonable, the neighbors were friendly, and Marcus was happier than I had ever seen him. Then Patricia Williams moved into the house directly across from us. Patricia was what people politely called involved in the community. She carried a clipboard everywhere she went, measured grass heights with a ruler, and appointed herself the unofficial enforcer of every HOA rule ever written. Within her first week in the neighborhood, she had issued verbal warnings to 4 different families about minor violations. I first met Patricia on a Tuesday morning while Marcus and Luna were practicing mobility work in our front yard. She marched across the street with her clipboard held high and her measuring tape dangling from her belt like a weapon. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I am Patricia Williams, the new HOA treasurer. That dog appears to be over the size limit specified in our community guidelines." I looked down at Luna, who was sitting perfectly beside Marcus, her tail wagging gently. "She is a service dog in training," I explained. "Service animals are protected under federal law, regardless of breed or size restrictions." Patricia's eyes narrowed as she scribbled something on her clipboard. "We will see about that," she said. "Rules are rules, Mr. Chen. Nobody gets special treatment in my neighborhood." My neighborhood. Those 2 words should have warned me about everything that was coming. Over the next few weeks, Patricia began her campaign of harassment with the dedication of a full-time job. She measured our grass and found it 1/4 inch too tall. She determined our mailbox was positioned 2 inches too far from the curb. She documented the exact angle of our garden hose and declared it violated the neat and orderly appearance clause of the HOA covenant. Every violation came with a formal letter, a fine, and Patricia's personal signature at the bottom. She was building a paper trail, and I was beginning to understand that Luna had become her primary target. The breaking point came on a Saturday afternoon when Marcus was playing fetch with Luna in our backyard. Patricia appeared at our fence line with her phone held high, recording video. "Patricia," I called out, walking toward the fence, "what are you doing?" She did not lower the phone. "Documenting aggressive animal behavior," she said. "That dog appears agitated and potentially dangerous to community children." I looked at Luna, who was gently placing a tennis ball at Marcus's feet, her tail wagging with pure joy. "She is playing fetch with my son." "I know what I see," Patricia replied, finally lowering her phone. "And what I see is a problem that needs to be solved." That night, I realized Patricia Williams was not just another pushy neighbor. She was something much more dangerous. She was a woman with power, influence, and absolutely no conscience about how she used either one. Patricia's harassment escalated with the precision of a military campaign. Within 2 weeks, she had issued formal HOA violations for things I never knew could be violations. Our garden gnome was inappropriate decorative items. Our welcome mat was non-regulation door accessories. Even the small American flag I displayed by our front door was somehow unapproved patriotic displays. Each violation came with a $50 fine and a deadline for compliance. More importantly, each violation went into what Patricia called my resident file, which she promised would be reviewed by the HOA board at their monthly meeting. But the property violations were just the opening act. Patricia's real target was Luna, and she began her attack with the cunning of someone who understood exactly how to weaponize rules against people who could not fight back. It started with complaints about Luna's presence in the common areas. According to Patricia, service dogs were not supposed to use the community walking paths because they intimidated other residents. When I showed her the federal laws protecting service animal access, she switched tactics and began complaining about Luna's behavior. Every bark was excessive noise. Every moment Luna stopped to sniff was loitering in common areas. When Luna would naturally position herself between Marcus and approaching strangers, Patricia documented it as aggressive protective behavior that threatens community safety. The worst part was watching Marcus begin to doubt himself and Luna. My confident, happy son started hesitating before leaving the house. He would ask me if Luna was allowed to walk on certain paths, if she was behaving correctly, if they were breaking any rules just by existing in their own neighborhood. "Dad," Marcus asked me one evening as we sat on our front porch, "why does Mrs. Williams not like Luna? Did we do something wrong?" I looked at my 12-year-old son, whose biggest worry should have been homework and video games, and felt my heart break a little more. "No, buddy," I said. "You and Luna have done nothing wrong. Some people just like having power over others, even when it hurts innocent people." "But Luna helps me," Marcus said, his hand finding Luna's head in that automatic way that had become second nature. "She makes me feel safe." "I know she does," I replied, "and nobody is going to take that away from you." I meant those words when I said them. I had no idea how hard Patricia would make me fight to keep that promise. The HOA board meeting was scheduled for the third Thursday of October. Patricia had spent weeks campaigning among the residents, spreading her version of events to anyone who would listen. According to her story, Luna was an untrained, aggressive animal that posed a danger to children and violated multiple community standards. She organized coffee meetings where she showed her carefully edited videos of Luna displaying concerning behaviors. She distributed printed packets documenting every time Luna had barked, every instance where she had moved to protect Marcus, every moment that could be twisted into evidence of poor training or aggressive tendencies. By the time the board meeting arrived, Patricia had convinced half the neighborhood that Marcus and Luna were the problem residents who needed to be dealt with before someone got hurt. I attended that meeting with a folder full of documentation: Luna's training certificates, Marcus's medical records, federal law printouts, and character references from neighbors who actually knew us. I was prepared to fight Patricia's lies with facts and legal precedent. The five-member HOA board listened to Patricia's presentation with the kind of attention usually reserved for matters of life and death. She spoke for 20 minutes about community safety, property values, and the importance of consistent rule enforcement. She presented her videos, her violation reports, and her petitions signed by concerned residents. When it was my turn to speak, I presented the federal laws that protected Marcus's right to have a service animal. I showed Luna's training documentation and explained her role in my son's daily independence. I provided medical testimony about Marcus's need for Luna's assistance. The board listened politely, asked a few questions, and promised to review all the information before making their decision. But I could see in their faces that Patricia had already won. They were scared of lawsuits, scared of conflict, and scared of the woman who had just spent 20 minutes making my family sound like a threat to their peaceful community. 2 days later, I received the board's decision in the mail. Luna could remain in the community, but with restrictions. She was banned from common areas during peak hours. She was required to wear a muzzle when outside our property, and any future complaints about her behavior would result in immediate removal from the community. I stared at that letter for a long time, understanding that Patricia had just won the first major battle in a war I never wanted to fight. But as I watched Marcus reading the restrictions in Braille, his fingers moving across the page with growing distress, I realized Patricia had made a crucial mistake. She had declared war on my child, and that was a fight she was never going to win. The muzzle requirement was Patricia's masterstroke of cruelty. She knew that muzzling a service dog would interfere with Luna's ability to assist Marcus, but technically, the board's decision did not violate federal law because Luna could still perform her basic functions. For 2 weeks, Marcus and Luna adapted to their new restrictions. They avoided common areas during morning and evening hours when other residents were outside. Luna wore the soft basket muzzle I had purchased, which allowed her to pant and drink, but prevented her from picking up objects or providing some of her trained assistance behaviors. Marcus hated every moment of it. The muzzle made Luna look aggressive and frightening, which attracted stares and comments from neighbors who did not understand the situation. Children who had previously wanted to pet Luna now crossed the street to avoid her. Marcus went from being the kid with the cool dog to being the kid with the scary dog who might bite someone. But we endured it because I believed that compliance would eventually prove Patricia wrong. I thought that if we followed every rule, met every restriction, and demonstrated Luna's perfect behavior, the board would see through Patricia's lies and restore our normal life. I was wrong about everything. October 15th was the day Patricia implemented her final solution. Marcus had a routine appointment with his ophthalmologist that afternoon, a quarterly checkup that required pupil dilation and would leave him more dependent on Luna than usual. I had informed the HOA of our temporary absence, as required by the new restrictions, and arranged for Luna to stay home in our secured backyard while we were gone. The appointment took longer than expected. Marcus's doctor wanted to run additional tests, and by the time we returned home, the sun was setting and our street was quiet in that peaceful way that had once made me love our neighborhood. I knew something was wrong the moment we pulled into our driveway. Luna always greeted us at the gate when we returned home, her tail wagging and her whole body wiggling with excitement at seeing Marcus. But the backyard was silent, and the gate that should have been securely latched was standing slightly open. "Where is Luna?" Marcus asked, his voice already tight with worry. I helped Marcus out of the car and led him toward the backyard, my heart pounding with a dread I could not yet name. The gate was definitely open, but there were no signs of damage or forced entry. Someone had opened it deliberately and carefully. "Luna," Marcus called, his voice echoing across our empty yard. "Luna, come here, girl." Silence. I searched every corner of our property while Marcus stood by the back door, calling Luna's name with increasing desperation. She was not hiding in the garden shed or under the deck. She was not injured somewhere in the yard. She was simply gone, as if she had vanished into thin air. "Dad," Marcus said, tears starting to flow down his cheeks, "where is she? Where is Luna?" I did not have an answer. Luna had never run away, never shown any inclination to leave our property, and was far too well trained to simply wander off. Someone had taken her, but who would steal a service dog from a blind child? The answer appeared on Patricia's front porch just as I was reaching for my phone to call the police. She emerged from her house carrying a small watering can, moving with the casual confidence of someone enjoying a normal evening routine. "David," she called across the street, her voice filled with fake concern. "Is everything all right?" I heard shouting. I walked to the edge of my property, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "Luna is missing," I said. "Have you seen her?" Patricia set down her watering can and shook her head with exaggerated sympathy. "Oh no, that is terrible. Although I suppose it is not entirely surprising. Service dogs can be unpredictable when they are not properly supervised." "She was in our secured backyard," I replied. "Someone opened the gate." "Really?" Patricia said, raising her eyebrows. "Are you sure she did not just push it open herself? Dogs are quite clever about escaping when they want to explore." Behind me, Marcus was still calling for Luna, his voice breaking with each unanswered cry. Patricia looked past me toward my son, and for just a moment I saw something flicker across her face. Not sympathy or concern, but satisfaction. "I am sure she will turn up," Patricia said, turning back toward her house. "These things usually work themselves out." That night was the longest of my life. Marcus cried himself to sleep asking questions I could not answer. Why would Luna run away? Did she not love us anymore? Was it his fault for not taking better care of her? I spent the entire night searching the neighborhood, calling Luna's name, and checking with neighbors who mostly claimed they had not seen anything unusual. The police took a report but treated it as a simple case of a lost pet, despite my explanations about Luna's service animal status and the suspicious circumstances of her disappearance. The next morning, I found Luna. She was in the community dumpster behind the clubhouse, trapped under a heavy wooden board that someone had placed over the opening. When I lifted that board and saw Luna's terrified eyes looking up at me through a pile of rotting garbage, something inside me died and something else was born. Luna was alive but traumatized, covered in filth and trembling with fear. She had spent approximately 18 hours trapped in that metal container, fighting for air through decomposing trash, probably believing she was going to die alone in the dark. As I lifted her out of that dumpster, she looked at me with eyes that no longer held the confident trust of a well-loved service dog. She had learned something terrible about human beings, and that knowledge would forever change the way she saw the world. I carried Luna home in my arms, her body shaking against my chest, and made a decision that would change everything. Patricia Williams had just crossed a line that separated harassment from cruelty, and now she was going to learn exactly what happened to people who hurt my family. I documented everything with the methodical precision my military training had burned into my DNA. Photographs of Luna's condition, measurements of the dumpster, analysis of the wooden board that had been used to trap her. I collected soil samples, fingerprint evidence, and security camera footage from the businesses that bordered our community. Luna's veterinary examination revealed dehydration, minor cuts from sharp debris, and what the vet described as acute stress responses consistent with traumatic confinement. The medical report became part of my growing evidence file, along with time-stamped photos and witness statements from the few neighbors brave enough to admit they had seen Patricia near the clubhouse area the previous evening. But evidence was just the foundation. What I needed was a confession, and I knew exactly how to get one. Patricia's arrogance was her greatest weakness. She believed that her position as HOA treasurer and her influence with the board made her untouchable. She had spent months terrorizing my family while hiding behind rules and regulations, but now she had committed an actual crime, and her confidence was about to become her downfall. I waited 3 days for Luna's initial recovery, then walked across the street to Patricia's house with my phone recording in my shirt pocket. She was in her front garden, trimming roses with the kind of attention to detail that characterized everything she did. "Patricia," I said, approaching her white picket fence, "we need to talk." She looked up from her roses, secateurs still in her hand. "Oh, David, I heard you found your dog. That is wonderful news." "She was in the community dumpster," I said, watching Patricia's face carefully. "Trapped under a wooden board for 18 hours. Patricia's expression did not change, but I caught the tiny flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. "How terrible," she said. "I suppose some neighborhood children were playing a prank. Kids can be so cruel." "The board was too heavy for children to lift," I replied, "and it was positioned too precisely to be random vandalism. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing put Luna in that dumpster." Patricia set down her secateurs and looked at me with the kind of practiced innocence that had probably fooled people her entire life. "I hope you are not suggesting that I had anything to do with this unfortunate incident." "I am not suggesting anything," I said. "I am asking directly, did you put my son's service dog in that dumpster?" For a moment, Patricia maintained her facade of shocked denial. Then something shifted in her expression, and I saw the real Patricia Williams emerge from behind her suburban mask. "Your son," she said, her voice dropping to a cold whisper, "does not belong in this neighborhood. Children like him require special accommodations that affect property values and community standards. That animal is just another burden that the rest of us have to tolerate." I felt my blood pressure spike, but I kept my voice steady. "Luna is a service dog. She helps Marcus navigate the world independently." Patricia laughed, and it was the most chilling sound I had ever heard. "Independence. Your boy will never be independent. He will always be a burden on someone, whether it is you, the government, or whatever unfortunate community has to deal with his limitations." The recording device in my pocket captured every word as Patricia revealed the ideology that had been driving her campaign against my family. But she was not finished. "I did what needed to be done," she continued, her voice gaining strength as she abandoned all pretense. That dog needed to learn its place, just like your son needs to learn his. Maybe a night in the garbage will teach both of them that some neighborhoods are not meant for their kind. There it was, the full confession, recorded in high-definition audio, from the woman who had terrorized a blind child and tortured his service animal because she believed they did not deserve to exist in her perfect community. You locked a service dog in a dumpster to teach a lesson to a 12-year-old blind boy, I said, making sure the recording captured her admission clearly. Patricia smiled with the confidence of someone who believed she was completely protected from consequences. I did what the HOA board did not have the courage to do. I solved the problem permanently. And you think nothing will happen to you? Nothing will happen to me, Patricia confirmed. I have friends on the city council, connections in the police department, and influence with every HOA board member. Your complaints will disappear into paperwork, and eventually you will realize that fighting me is useless. Patricia Williams had just made the biggest mistake of her life, but as I looked at her confident smile, I realized she had no idea what she had unleashed. She saw me as just another frustrated parent who would eventually give up and move away. She was about to learn that some people do not give up. Some people fight back, and some people have the skills and resources to destroy their enemies completely. Patricia, I said, turning to walk back to my house, you just declared war on the wrong family. Her laughter followed me across the street, confident and cruel, and completely unaware that she had just recorded her own destruction. That night, I activated skills I had not used since my military intelligence days. Patricia Williams thought she was untouchable, but she had never been investigated by someone who understood how to dismantle lives with surgical precision. I started with her digital footprint. Patricia was active on social media, and like most people who believe they are anonymous online, she had posted things she would never say in public. Her Facebook account revealed a pattern of extremist views that went far beyond simple HOA enforcement. She had shared articles about undesirable populations, affecting property values. She had commented on posts about disabled children being drains on community resources. Most damning of all, she had bragged in a private HOA board group about creative solutions to problem residents, and posted photos that clearly showed Luna trapped in the dumpster with captions like, "Teaching lessons to entitled families." The social media evidence was devastating, but it was just the beginning. Patricia's confidence in her local connections had made her sloppy about covering her tracks, and once I started digging into her background, I found a pattern of behavior that stretched back years. As HOA treasurer, Patricia had access to community funds and financial records. A detailed analysis of the association's bank statements revealed irregularities that could only be explained by systematic embezzlement. Small amounts at first, then larger sums as she became more confident in her ability to manipulate the books. Patricia had been stealing from her neighbors for over 2 years, using her position as treasurer to authorize payments to fictitious contractors and pocket the difference. The total amount exceeded $50,000, which elevated her crimes from misdemeanor harassment to felony fraud. But the financial crimes were connected to something even larger. Patricia's husband, Robert Williams, owned a construction company that had been awarded several community improvement contracts through what appeared to be rigged bidding processes. Those contracts were funded with federal housing development grants, which meant Patricia's embezzlement scheme involved federal money. Federal crimes meant federal investigators. Federal investigators meant people who could not be influenced by Patricia's local connections. and federal charges meant consequences that Patricia could never manipulate her way out of. The deeper I dug, the more victims I found. Patricia had been systematically targeting vulnerable residents for years, using her HOA position to harass people who could not fight back effectively. Elderly residents who could not maintain their properties to her impossible standards. Single mothers who could not afford the fines she imposed for minor violations. Disabled residents whose accommodations Patricia viewed as threats to community uniformity. Each victim had been isolated and intimidated into compliance, believing they were the only ones facing Patricia's wrath. But when I began reaching out to them with evidence of Patricia's broader pattern of abuse, they started sharing their stories. Margaret Foster was 83 years old and had been living in Willowbrook Estates since its construction 15 years earlier. Patricia had been fining her for excessive bird feeding and unkempt garden areas that were really just the natural effects of aging and limited mobility. "I thought about moving," Margaret told me during a quiet conversation on her front porch. "But this is my home. I should not have to leave because that woman wants to play dictator." James Rodriguez was a single father raising twin daughters after his wife died in a car accident. Patricia had targeted him with noise complaints every time his children played in their backyard, claiming their laughter and normal play activities violated community quiet hours. "She made my girls afraid to play outside," James said. "After their mother died, this house was supposed to be their safe place. Patricia turned it into somewhere they had to walk on eggshells." The pattern was clear and consistent. Patricia identified residents who were isolated, vulnerable, or different from her vision of community perfection, then used her position to make their lives miserable until they either submitted completely to her control or moved away. But I had found something else in my investigation, something that elevated Patricia's crimes beyond local harassment into federal territory. Her targeting of disabled residents, elderly residents, and minority families constituted a pattern of civil rights violations under federal fair housing laws. Patricia Williams was not just a neighborhood bully. She was a systematic predator who had been using her position to discriminate against protected classes while stealing federal money to enrich herself and her husband. I compiled everything into a comprehensive case file that would have impressed my former colleagues at military intelligence. Financial records, social media evidence, victim testimonies, recorded confessions, and documented patterns of discriminatory enforcement that violated multiple federal statutes. The local police had dismissed my initial complaints about Luna as a simple pet dispute. The HOA board had been manipulated into supporting Patricia's harassment campaign. But federal investigators would see the bigger picture, and they would have the resources and authority to hold Patricia accountable for every crime she had committed. I had one more piece of evidence to collect before I made my final move. Patricia had been so confident in her confession that she had not bothered to check whether our conversation was being recorded. But I needed to document her pattern of targeting disabled residents in a way that would be undeniable in federal court. The next morning, I called Patricia and asked if she would be willing to discuss a compromise solution that might allow Marcus and Luna to remain in the community under additional restrictions. She agreed to meet me at the community clubhouse, probably believing she had finally broken my will to fight. She had no idea she was walking into a trap that would destroy her life forever. The federal agents arrived at Patricia Williams' house at exactly 6:30 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. I watched from my kitchen window as 3 black SUVs pulled into her driveway, followed by an FBI Financial Crimes Unit van and 2 local police cruisers for support. Patricia had always been an early riser, and I could see her silhouette in her kitchen window as the agents approached her front door. The first knock was professional and measured. The second knock was more insistent. By the third knock, Patricia had opened her door to find 6 federal agents holding search warrants and arrest documents. I had been waiting for this moment for 3 weeks, ever since I submitted my comprehensive evidence package to the FBI field office in Richmond. The special agent in charge had called me personally after reviewing my files, telling me that Patricia's case was being fast-tracked due to the severity of the civil rights violations and the federal money involved in her embezzlement scheme. From my window, I watched Patricia's world collapse in real time. She emerged from her house in handcuffs, still wearing her bathrobe, her face twisted with the kind of shock reserved for people who never believed consequences would find them. The search of her house took 4 hours. Agents carried out boxes of financial records, computer equipment, and documents related to her HOA activities. They dismantled her home office, photographed her filing systems, and seized her personal electronics for forensic analysis. At 10:15 a.m., a second team of federal agents arrived at Robert Williams' construction site across town. Patricia's husband was arrested while operating heavy machinery, his workers watching in stunned silence as FBI agents led him away in handcuffs. The charges were extensive and devastating. Patricia faced 14 counts of federal embezzlement, 9 counts of civil rights violations, 6 counts of mail fraud, and 4 counts of conspiracy. Robert faced matching charges related to the fraudulent contracting scheme, plus additional counts for money laundering and tax evasion. The local news stations picked up the story by noon, broadcasting footage of the FBI raids and reading a Department of Justice press release that detailed the scope of Patricia's crimes. The woman who had terrorized vulnerable residents while hiding behind HOA authority was now facing the possibility of 20 years in federal prison. But the most satisfying moment came when Patricia's carefully constructed network of local protection crumbled under federal scrutiny. The city council members who had protected her were suddenly unavailable for comment. The police officers who had dismissed complaints against her were transferred to different divisions. The HOA board members who had enabled her harassment campaign were replaced by emergency election within 48 hours. Patricia had spent years believing that her local connections made her untouchable. She never understood that federal authority supersedes local politics, and that civil rights violations are taken seriously by investigators who cannot be influenced by small-town corruption. The community reaction was swift and decisive. Residents who had been afraid to speak out against Patricia for years suddenly found their voices. The HOA board issued a formal apology to every family Patricia had targeted, along with refunds for illegitimate fines and commitments to policy changes that would prevent future abuse. Margaret Foster, the elderly woman Patricia had been harassing for years, stood in her front garden the morning after the arrest, filling her bird feeders with the kind of defiant joy that comes from watching bullies face justice. "I never thought I would live to see that woman get what she deserved," Margaret told me. "But sometimes the system actually works the way it is supposed to." James Rodriguez brought his twin daughters to thank me personally, explaining that they had started playing outside again for the first time in months. "They are not afraid anymore," he said, watching his girls run around our backyard with Luna, who had finally begun to trust humans again. "Patricia cannot hurt them now." As for Marcus, he stood beside me that morning watching the FBI agents load evidence boxes into their vehicles, his hand resting on Luna's head in that familiar gesture of connection and trust. "Is it over, Dad?" he asked. I looked at Patricia's empty house, then down at my son and his beloved service dog, who had survived Patricia's cruelty and emerged stronger on the other side. "Yes, buddy," I said, "it is finally over." 6 months later, Patricia Williams stood in federal court wearing an orange jumpsuit and ankle shackles, listening to Judge Rebecca Morrison deliver a sentence that would define the rest of her life. "Mrs. Williams," Judge Morrison said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "your crimes represent a systematic abuse of power that targeted the most vulnerable members of your community. You stole federal money, violated civil rights, and inflicted emotional trauma on disabled children and elderly residents who trusted you to serve their interests." The courtroom was packed with Patricia's victims, many of whom had submitted impact statements describing how her harassment had affected their lives. Marcus and I sat in the front row, Luna resting calmly at Marcus's feet, wearing her official service dog vest with quiet dignity. "The court sentences you to 18 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation," Judge Morrison continued. "You will also pay full restitution to the HOA Community Fund, plus additional damages to the families you targeted through your discriminatory enforcement actions." Patricia collapsed into her chair, finally understanding that her crimes had consequences she could never escape through influence or manipulation. Her husband Robert received a similar sentence at his hearing the following week, ensuring that their family would face the full weight of justice for their systematic abuse of federal law. The community healing process had begun long before the sentencing hearing. Under new leadership, the Willowbrook Estates HOA had implemented policies specifically designed to protect vulnerable residents and prevent the kind of abuse Patricia had inflicted for years. Margaret Foster was elected to the HOA board, bringing the perspective of someone who had survived Patricia's harassment and understood the importance of protecting community members rather than terrorizing them. James Rodriguez joined the Architectural Review Committee, ensuring that families with children would never again face the kind of discrimination his daughters had experienced. The HOA also established a victims' compensation fund, using the money recovered from Patricia's embezzlement scheme, providing financial assistance to residents who had been illegally fined or forced to make unnecessary property modification to satisfy Patricia's impossible standards. Marcus thrived in the new environment. With Patricia's threat eliminated, he and Luna returned to their daily walks through the neighborhood, but now they were greeted with waves and smiles from neighbors who had learned to see past disability to the remarkable young man who had survived such cruelty with grace and strength. Luna's recovery had been slower but equally complete. The trauma of her night in the dumpster had left emotional scars that required months of patient rehabilitation, but her bond with Marcus had provided the foundation for healing. She was still the same gentle, intelligent service dog who helped Marcus navigate the world independently. But now, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of a survivor who had overcome the worst that humans could inflict. The broader impact of Patricia's case extended far beyond our community. Her prosecution became a model for federal enforcement of fair housing laws in HOA communities, leading to policy changes that protected disabled residents, elderly residents, and minority families from discriminatory harassment across the country. As for me, I learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply ensuring that justice is served completely and publicly. Patricia Williams had declared war on my family because she believed we did not belong in her perfect neighborhood. Her punishment was discovering that people who hurt disabled children and torture service animals do not belong in civilized society. On quiet evenings, I sit on our front porch watching Marcus and Luna play in the yard that Patricia once tried to take away from us. The neighborhood is peaceful again, but it is a different kind of peace than we had before. It is the peace that comes from knowing that bullies can be defeated, that justice sometimes prevails, and that communities can heal from even the cruelest forms of systematic abuse. Patricia Williams locked my son's service dog in a dumpster because she thought she was untouchable. She was wrong about everything.